Let's rank the top 15 wide receivers in the SEC going into 2024. I've already done quarterbacks for each conference. I've already done running backs for each conference, so check those out if that sounds interesting at all to you. I'm also including tight ends on this list, and I'm doing top 15 for this list. I might not do that for all conferences depending on the talent, but the talent at wide receiver in this conference is ridiculous in the SEC. I did the running back rankings, and I said that SEC is probably on the lower end of the Power 4 conferences as far as talent at the running back position. It is completely the opposite at the wide receiver position. Like, the amount of talent I'm leaving off this list is really wrong. I'm doing top 15 SEC wide receivers, and I'm leaving off Dane Key at Kentucky, who has been really good there the past couple years, and he should have a breakout season under new quarterback Brock Vandegrift there at Kentucky. I'm missing Cam Coleman at Auburn, the new freshman sensation. He should be a beast, and everybody should know his name this coming season. Cam Coleman, and I'm missing Benjamin Urosek, the tight end at Georgia. I'm missing Dominic Lovett, the wide receiver at Georgia. I'm also missing Theo Wease at Missouri. The list just goes on and on. And here's my top 15. Number 15, just barely making it on this list, Chris Brazzle at Tennessee, new wide receiver at Tennessee. He was at Tulane the past 2 years. In his redshirt freshman year last year at Tulane, he had 700 yards and 5 touchdowns, and that was with Michael Pratt at quarterback. That was with Willie Fritz at head coach. Now he joins Josh Heupel, and he gets to catch passes from Nico, so it really should be fun. He joins an elite group of wide receivers at Tennessee. Number 14, one of the only tight ends on this list, Caden Prescorn at Ole Miss, 450 yards, 4 touchdowns. Not a lot of production last year. He spent the last 3 years at Memphis before heading to Ole Miss last offseason. But this guy has so much talent, so much skill, and he can catch any pass thrown his way. Watch some highlights of that Penn State bowl game when Ole Miss played them in the bowl game. I can't remember what bowl it was, but just the catches he made, it was just insane. So I'm super excited to watch him in that elite wide receiver group again this year at Ole Miss. Number 13, Dion Burks at Oklahoma, a new wide receiver for Oklahoma. He comes over from Purdue, where he spent the last 3 years, I want to say. He's going into his 4th year this year. And last year at Purdue, he had over 600 yards receiving and 7 touchdowns. And the reason why I have him on this list, like a lot of receivers I'll talk about later, he did not have a good quarterback at all throwing to him. He had Hudson Card, and just a very inconsistent quarterback at best, and he still balled out. And he will be on a lot of people's minds this season because of how fast he is. The speed is unreal. He had some really good moments in the spring game for Oklahoma, and I'm really, really excited to watch him in the SEC this year. Number 12, another new face in the SEC, Kelly Akari at Mississippi State. He transfers from UTEP, where he spent the last 2 seasons there. And last year at UTEP, he just put up mind-blowing numbers. Over 1,000 yards, 7 touchdowns at UTEP under a quarterback in Cade McConnell for most of the season. That was not very good. UTEP was not very good as a whole last season, but this guy was a standout, and I can't wait to see him in that Jeff Lebby and offense with Blake Shapen at quarterback. Number 11, Trey Wilson or Eugene Wilson at Florida. Wide receiver at Florida. Had a really good season last year in his true freshman season. Over 600 yards and 6 touchdowns. And why I have him so high is because they put their whole offense around him and Ricky Pearsall last season at Florida. They let Graham Mertz do so many screens a game, so many just tosses to them, Ricky Pearsall and Trey Wilson, and they just made their whole offense dedicated to those two, and that's why I have him so high. That's why I feel like he's so important for Florida, especially this year with Ricky Pearsall in the NFL. I just think it's really his year at Florida. Number 10, Andrew Armstrong at Arkansas. He's getting a lot of hype this offseason. Had 750 yards and 5 touchdowns last season, and that should warrant a lot of hype, especially with how up and down and just plain bad that offense was, even with a good quarterback in KJ Jefferson at quarterback. They just didn't put their strengths in KJ's hands and didn't really let him air it out like usual. And so for Andrew Armstrong to have that season statistically is really saying something. And this year, he's going into his redshirt senior year, I want to say. He spent the last 3 or 4 years at Texas A&M Commerce. So last season was his first season at the FBS level, and he stood out. Number 9, Squirrel White at Tennessee. And last year, he had 800 yards and 2 touchdowns, a really solid year. I was wanting a breakout year for Squirrel White last year, and I know Tennessee fans were as well. and basically because of how good he was his freshman season for Hendon Hooker. And he had a really good season last year, doubled his yards, but the production, touchdown production, was not very good. This season he has Nico throwing to him instead of Joe Milton from last year, so it really should change his the way he plays the game, and I'll be really excited to watch that. Number 8, Jordan Watkins at Ole Miss. Last year he had over 700 receiving yards and 3 touchdowns in a loaded receiving room. I'll talk about another guy in the receiving room that comes back for them a little bit later. I've already talked about the tight end pre-scoring, so it's just a loaded room for Ole Miss, and they actually lost a really good wide receiver as well. But he comes back, and that offense is just going to be lethal. They have a slew of really good running backs. They have Jackson Dart at quarterback. They have an insane wide receiver room, if I don't say that enough. Lane Kiffin as the head coach. You know the offense is going to be ridiculous. But, man, I cannot wait to watch Jordan Watkins again and that entire offense again this year. Number 7, Kylin Lacy at LSU. Last season at LSU, he had over 500 yards and 7 touchdowns. And those aren't really eye-popping stats or anything, but when you think about who he shared the wide receiver room with and who he caught passes with, 2 first-round picks, Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas Jr., and it really makes you think about those stats. He put up those stats with those 2 guys also catching passes beside him. And this year, he'll be either number 1 option or the number 2 option, depending on who you ask. So super excited to watch him catch passes from Garrett Nussmeier another year in the offense at LSU. Number 6, Isaiah Bond, the new wide receiver at Texas. At Alabama last year, he had almost 700 yards and 4 touchdowns last season with Jalen Milroe throwing him the ball. And one of his best games was against Texas last year. As funny as that is, now he's a Longhorn. He also had that 4th and 31 touchdown catch that everybody probably knows him for. But yeah, it'll be weird seeing him in a Longhorn uniform this year, but he's a really good wide receiver. Number 5, another Texas wide receiver, Silas Balden from Texas, but he was at Oregon State the last few years. Had over 800 yards last year, 7 touchdowns for DJU was throwing the ball to him last season. But now he's at Texas with Quinn Ewers, and I'm really excited to see him on the big stage, on the national stage, and everybody will know his name this coming season. Number 4, another guy that everybody will likely know the name of this season, CJ Daniels at LSU. He came over from Liberty, where he spent the last 4 seasons there. 1,100 yards last season, 10 touchdowns, and he is going to be the number 1 or number 2 option with Kylin Lacy in that LSU offense, with Garrett Nussmeier throwing him the ball. He's on the national stage now. It should be really exciting. He is just so fun to watch, so quick. Last season he caught balls from Caden Salter, and this season he'll catch them from Garrett. Number 3, a very underrated wide receiver since we didn't see him a lot last season, Juice Wells, the new wide receiver at Ole Miss. Spent the last couple seasons at South Carolina, where he was a huge force in that offense, especially in 2022. Last season he got hurt very early on. I think it was week 3 in that Georgia game after he already caught a touchdown pass. But when South Carolina turned their season around in 2022 and won those last 2 big games versus Tennessee versus Clemson, Juice Wells had almost 200 yards receiving in that Tennessee game, followed it up a week later with 130 yards and 2 touchdowns versus Clemson, had almost 1,000 yards in 2022. So it's very easy to forget what he did, but he is going to be a force in that Ole Miss wide receiver room that's already loaded. And speaking of that Ole Miss wide receiver room, number 2, Trey Harris, almost 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns last season for Ole Miss. That was his first year there. The previous 3, he was at Louisiana Tech, where in 2022 he almost had 1,000 yards that season. So an insanely good wide receiver. He's going into his 5th year of college, and he's just going to be a dynamic weapon with all the good wide receivers around him in that Ole Miss offense. But at number 1, pretty easily, Luther Burton at Missouri. One of the best players in college football this year. Not even wide receiver. He's one of the best players. 1,300 yards last season, or almost 1,300 yards last season. 9 touchdowns. He should be even better this year unless teams just double team him and triple team him all season, which that's not a bad idea with how good this guy is. But he's going to be so fun to watch another year in that Eli Drinkowitz system, and I can't wait for it. But yeah, guys, that is my top 15 receivers in the SEC heading into 2024. Comment what you disagree with below. Comment some guys I forgot. Now I have to do the Big Ten receivers, then so on and so on until I get those knocked out in all the conferences. But yeah, follow us on TikTok, 3&OUT CFB, on Twitter, 3&OUT_CFB. But I appreciate y'all for watching.